past week during a Democratic debate, there was a kerfuffle between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren over whether a female president is possible. Spoiler alert, it's not only possible, but inevitable. There are now slightly more women in the workplace than men. It happened in 2009 when the Great Recession destroyed industries where men were disproportionately represented. But in a period of low unemployment, now, the current trends represent the new normal. As of 2017, there were 2.2 million more women than men in college. And the Department of Education forecasted by 2026, women will make up 57% of college students, leaving men in the proverbial dust. Women dominate the service sector, especially in health and education, where in December 2019, a full 95% of net jobs added went to women, a stunning statistic. In 1970, women accounted for 29% of the workforce. Today, over 50% of the non-farm labor force are women. If that isn't a massive victory for feminism, what would be? Yes, the gender pay gap persists, but when accounting for choice of profession, working hours, and parental leave, women now earn roughly 95% of male hourly earnings. Not good enough, granted, but still at record highs. As the economy shifts toward the sectors where women dominate, and as women get more education than men, this trend looks likely to not only continue, but intensify. Yes, executive positions are still male-dominated, but all the stats point upward. And for much of corporate America, a more diverse workforce is increasingly valued. In 1970, there were no women in the Senate. Now there are 26, more than half of the entire number of female senators in U.S. history. In the House in 1980, women accounted for 3% of the members. Now it's 23%, and the Speaker is a woman. There's work to be done, but this rise in women's earnings and power seems real and inexorable. Sexual harassment is resilient, although the Me Too movement has made it more difficult for abusive men to freely operate. This isn't to say women don't still have obstacles that men don't have to deal with. We all see a lot more now than we used to, and as a truth-seeking moderate, I'm grateful for having my blind spots pointed out. But comparing the condition of women today with women in an era that was, say, denied the right to vote, denied education, careers, or treated them as property, it's a whole universe of advance. Yet feminist rhetoric has intensified despite all the progress that's been made. In recent books and in academic circles, there is renewed rage against the oppression of women. The demonization of white men has intensified as many working-class white men face a bleak economic future and are disappearing from the workforce in numbers. It seems that the less gender discrimination there is, the angrier you should become. This is not just in feminism. Take the gay rights movement. I'm constantly hearing how now is the most perilous moment for LGBTQ people. Most perilous? Let's take a quick look over our shoulders. When all gay sex was criminal, when many were left by their government to die of AIDS, when no gay relationships were recognized by law, and even further back, when the federal government pursued a purge of anyone suspected of being gay. The right is not immune to the same cognitive biases either. Trump talks about crime as if we're still living in the 1980s. The acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security said, quote, "There's been a complete breakdown of law and order in New York City." Let's put some numbers to this. Last year, there were 295 murders in New York. As recently as 1990, there were 2,295. Trump speaks about illegal immigration overwhelming the country. In 2018, there were 400,000 people caught trying to enter the U.S. illegally on the southern border. Under Reagan and George W. Bush, those numbers peaked at over 1.6 million per year. So why is there a pathological need to ramp up the rhetoric? On the right, it's fueled by the absurd hyperbole that Trump uses all the time. On the left, it's Trump himself. His extremism, misogyny, and transphobia have all provoked a sharp turn to the left among Democrats. But, as the workforce numbers for women show us, there's little he can actually do to prevent a very bright future for women. He could tip the court, which could repeal Roe, but that would likely provoke a strong backlash leading to more moderate federal legislation in its place. Marriage equality is settled law, according to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Gay visibility is ubiquitous in pop culture. Black unemployment is at record lows. Black women are seeing real improvement in their career and earnings. Crime in urban neighborhoods is a fraction of what it was in the 80s and 90s. So this fear of Trump is largely misplaced, as his ability to influence these broader cultural tides is quite limited. So why are we all being deluged with narratives that the sky is falling? A recent psychological study suggests that oppression creep is the culprit. That is, the more progress we observe, the greater the remaining injustices appear. People have a cognitive blind spot where we seem incapable of keeping a concept stable over time when the prevalence of that concept declines. In other words, we see relatively, not absolutely. We change our standards all the time depending on context. As part of this study, psychologists showed participants a range of threatening and non-threatening faces and asked them to identify which was which. Next, they were split into two groups and repeated the exercise. The first group was shown the same ratio of threatening and non-threatening faces as before. The second group was shown far fewer threatening faces. Sure enough, the second group adjusted by seeing faces they once thought of as non-threatening as threatening. So they believed there was no overall change in the number of threatening faces. We seem to be wired to assume a given threat remains just as menacing even when its actual prevalence has declined. This study and others suggest that even well-meaning people may sometimes fail to recognize the success of their own efforts, simply because each new instance shows up more starkly against the backdrop of genuine improvement. Although modern society has made extraordinary progress in solving a wide range of social problems, from poverty and illiteracy to violence, infant mortality, the majority of people believe that the world is getting worse, which isn't borne out by the facts. That fears grow larger as the source of those fears dissipates is a form of fallacious reasoning that we need to guard against. This may help explain why, in the midst of tremendous gains for gays, women, and racial minorities, some people insist more than ever that we live in a patriarchal, misogynist, white supremacist, homophobic era. We constantly adjust our view to ensure we don't believe it has changed at all. Maybe this is just each generation shifting the goalpost. Or maybe it's because we've made so much progress that the injustice that remains appears so large. But whatever the cause, the result is that we refuse to accept the fact of progress and instead are caught in a cycle of eternal frustration at what injustices remain. We never seem to be able to say, things are pretty good, but there's still work to be done. We can only ever say, it's worse than ever. And we feel it in our bones. But our bones are evolutionarily wired to lie to us about the nature of reality. It's only through reason and enlightenment thinking that we can transcend this pessimism and embrace a brighter future. Thank you.